Hello there, and welcome back to Restful Realities. Tonight, we're journeying to a land where ancient stones whisper stories of empires, where the earth itself breathes fire through volcanic peaks, and where every cobblestone street holds secrets that have unfolded across millennia. Italy, a boot-shaped peninsula extending into the Mediterranean Sea, is far more than the sum of its famous landmarks and beloved cuisine. Beneath the surface of Renaissance masterpieces and Roman ruins lies a collection of peculiarities, oddities, and mysteries that few travelers ever discover. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift as we explore the hidden, the unusual, and the utterly fascinating aspects of this remarkable country. Whether sleep finds you along the way, or you choose to listen to the very end, know that each fact we uncover tonight adds another layer to your understanding of this extraordinary place. Let's begin our exploration of Italy's most intriguing secrets. As we speak, something remarkable is unfolding across the northern reaches of Italy. The Milano Cortina Winter Olympics of 2026 are drawing near, and the nation is preparing to host athletes and spectators from every corner of the globe. This will mark the most geographically dispersed Winter Games in Olympic history, with events scattered across multiple mountain clusters spanning over 250 miles. Milan, the fashion and financial capital, will host ice hockey events in arenas that were still under construction just weeks ago, while Cortina d'Ampezzo, nestled high in the Dolomites, will welcome skiers to slopes that have seen competitions since before the Second World War. The torch relay has already begun its journey through Italian towns and villages, passing through ancient Roman streets and medieval piazzas, connecting the modern sporting spectacle with layers of history that stretch back thousands of years. Yet even as Italy prepares for this global event, the very mountains where athletes will compete tell their own story of geological violence and beauty, a story written in stone and fire, shaped by forces that have been at work since long before humans walked these lands. Italy sits atop one of the most geologically active regions in Europe, positioned along the boundary where the African tectonic plate collides with the Eurasian plate. This slow-motion collision, occurring over millions of years, has thrust up the Alps in the north and created a spine of mountains, the Apennines, that runs down the length of the peninsula like vertebrae. But the Earth's restlessness here manifests in more dramatic ways than just mountains. Italy is home to three of Europe's only active volcanoes: Mount Etna in Sicily, Mount Vesuvius near Naples, and Stromboli on its own island off Sicily's northern coast. Mount Etna, standing at 3,403 meters tall as measured in 2024, is not only Europe's tallest active volcano, but also one of the world's most active, erupting in some form almost every year for the past 500,000 years. Local Sicilians have learned to live with this fire-breathing mountain, cultivating vineyards on its fertile volcanic slopes and watching with a mixture of respect and unease as Etna occasionally illuminates the night sky with fountains of molten rock. In 2013, UNESCO recognized Etna's unique scientific and natural value by adding it to the World Heritage List, acknowledging that this mountain is not merely a geological curiosity, but a living laboratory where scientists can study volcanic processes in real time. According to ancient Roman and Greek mythology, Etna housed the workshop of Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, and forged a legend that, when one witnesses the mountain's Strombolian eruptions, sending incandescent lava fragments hundreds of meters into the air, seems to capture something true about the mountain's power, even if the divine blacksmith himself never existed. Stromboli, meanwhile, has been in nearly continuous eruption for at least 2,000 years, earning it the nickname Lighthouse of the Mediterranean, because sailors have long used its regular explosions as a navigational beacon in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Every 15 to 20 minutes, gas-rich magma rises through the volcano's vent and explodes in a burst of fire and ash, a rhythm so reliable that it has become background noise to the few hundred permanent residents who live on the island's slopes. Then there is Vesuvius, perhaps the most infamous of Italy's volcanic trio, the mountain that destroyed Pompeii and Herculaneum in 79 AD and has not erupted since 1944. Resting now in an ominous quietude that geologists monitor with intense vigilance. 3 million people live within Vesuvius's potential blast zone today, making it one of the most dangerous volcanoes on Earth, not because of its power, though that is considerable, but because of how many lives would be disrupted should it awaken. Italy's volcanic nature extends beyond these 3 famous peaks. The country has 31 dormant and active volcanic systems, more than any other European nation, a testament to the violent geological forces that continue to shape this land. Earthquakes ripple through Italy more frequently than anywhere else in Europe, with the Apennine Mountains particularly prone to seismic activity. This constant geological unrest has shaped not only the landscape, but also Italian architecture, urban planning, and even philosophy when the ground beneath your feet can suddenly shift. When mountains can explode without warning, you develop a particular relationship with impermanence and the present moment. The ancient Romans believed that volcanic activity represented the breath of gods and monsters, while modern Italians live with the practical knowledge that they're beautiful. Fertile homeland is also fundamentally unstable, capable of transformation and destruction on timescales, both geological and terrifyingly immediate. The morning that would become Pompeii's last began like any other, though whether this occurred on August 24th, 79 AD, as traditionally believed, or in mid-October of that year, as recent archaeological evidence suggests, remains a matter of scholarly debate. Based on the only eyewitness account we possess, written by Pliny the Younger some 25 years after the event, historians long accepted the August date. However, evidence uncovered in recent decades autumn fruits, like pomegranates preserved in the volcanic ash, heavy woolen clothing worn by victims, sealed wine storage vessels indicating the harvest had already occurred, and a charcoal inscription dated to October 17th, discovered in 2018, has led many researchers to conclude the eruption more likely happened in late October. The debate continues, with some scholars defending the traditional August date and others arguing the yellow. Accumulated evidence points decisively toward autumn. For our purposes tonight, what matters most is not the precise calendar date, but understanding what this catastrophic event preserved and revealed about Roman life. The city, home to approximately 11,000 people, bustled with the ordinary rhythms of Roman life: merchants opening their shops, bakers stoking their ovens, citizens visiting the forum to conduct business or gossip, children playing in the streets. Pompeii was a prosperous port city, strategically positioned near the mouth of the Sarnus River. Its economy built on trade, agriculture, and the production of a particularly prized wine that was exported throughout the Roman Empire. The city's wealthiest citizens lived in elaborate villas decorated with intricate frescoes and mosaics, while working-class Pompeians occupied smaller dwellings, many with attached workshops where they practiced trades like fulling cloth, making bread, or producing garum, the fermented fish sauce that Romans loved as much as modern Italians love their olive oil. Mount Vesuvius loomed over the city, its slopes covered with vineyards, but the mountain was not considered particularly threatening. It had been dormant for so long that Romans didn't even recognize it as a volcano. To them, it was simply a mountain, perhaps a bit unusually shaped, but nothing to fear. Shortly after midday, however, Vesuvius proved them catastrophically wrong. The mountain exploded with such violence that its eruption column rose 33 kilometers into the atmosphere, higher than modern passenger jets fly. For the next 18 hours, Pompeii was pelted with pumice and volcanic rock, accumulating to depths of nearly 3 meters. The city's residents had time to flee, and many did, but others remained. hiding in their homes or unable to escape for various reasons. Some were trapped by collapsed buildings. Others refused to abandon their possessions. And still others simply underestimated the danger until it was too late. Then, in the early morning of August 25th, came the pyroclastic surges, superheated clouds of gas and volcanic matter that raced down Vesuvius's slopes at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, with temperatures reaching 500 degrees Celsius. These surges killed instantly, flash cooking anyone they encountered and then burying them under meters of ash and pumice. Herculaneum, closer to Vesuvius than Pompeii, was completely engulfed by pyroclastic flows that carbonized wooden objects and boiled the brains of victims, leaving their skulls to explode from the pressure. When the eruption finally exhausted itself, Pompeii and Herculaneum had vanished from the landscape, buried so thoroughly that within a generation, people had forgotten their exact locations. It would be nearly 1,700 years before these lost cities were rediscovered. In 1748, workers constructing a canal stumbled upon ancient structures, and what followed was the birth of modern archaeology. Early excavations were haphazard affairs, more akin to treasure hunting than scientific inquiry, with workers digging tunnels through the volcanic material to extract valuable objects while destroying context and evidence. But as excavation techniques improved throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, Pompeii revealed itself to be an unparalleled time capsule, preserving not just buildings and artifacts, but the very texture of daily life in a first-century Roman city. Giuseppe Fiorelli, who directed excavations beginning in 1860, developed a revolutionary technique when he realized that the voids in the hardened ash layer were spaces where organic matter, primarily human and animal bodies, had decomposed. By carefully pouring plaster into these voids, Fiorelli could create casts that captured the exact final moments of Pompeii's victims in heartbreaking detail. We can see people in the poses of death, a mother cradling her child, a dog straining against its chain, a man covering his face against the toxic fumes, lovers embracing as the end came. These casts, perhaps more than any other artifact, make Pompeii's tragedy viscerally real. But Pompeii preserved far more than death. It preserved life. Walking through the excavated streets today, visitors encounter remarkably intact buildings, bakeries with millstones still in place, Thermopolia ancient fast food restaurants with counters designed to hold large ceramic jars of food, elaborate bath complexes where Romans gathered to socialize, launder their togas, and conduct business, and even a purpose-built amphitheater that could seat 20,000 spectators, making it one of the oldest stone amphitheaters ever discovered. The walls throughout Pompeii are covered with graffiti, not the work of modern vandals, but ancient inscriptions that provide an unfiltered glimpse into the minds of ordinary Romans. We find election slogans: "Vote for Lucius Popedius Sabinus." His grandmother worked hard for his last election and is pleased with the results. We find declarations of love. Successus was here with Severina. We find crude insults, accounts of gambling debts, menus, jokes, and even children's handwriting practice. One wall records the simple, poignant message: "We two dear men, friends forever, were here. If you want to know our names, they are Gaius and Aulus." The volcanic ash preserved organic materials that normally decay within years or decades. Carbonized loaves of bread still sit on bakery shelves. Fruit and nuts remain in their bowls. Wooden furniture survives as charred remains that nonetheless reveal their original forms. The frescoes that decorated Pompeian homes remain vibrant after 2,000 years because the ash that buried them protected them from weathering, light, and biological decay. These paintings reveal Romans' tastes in art, their mythological beliefs, their sense of humor, and even their erotic interests. with some homes containing explicitly sexual imagery that shocked Victorian-era archaeologists so thoroughly that they locked these artifacts away in a secret cabinet that was only open to male visitors of appropriate moral character, and even then only upon special request. Today, Pompeii receives approximately 2.5 million visitors annually, making it one of Italy's most popular tourist attractions. Yet despite centuries of excavation, portions of the city remain unexcavated, buried treasure waiting to reveal more secrets. Recent discoveries continue to astound. In 2020, archaeologists unearthed a remarkably well-preserved thermopolium complete with frescoes, food residue still in storage jars, and even the remains of ancient meals preserved in volcanic material. In 2018, excavators discovered a stable containing the skeletal remains of 3 harnessed horses, captured at the moment they tried to flee the eruption. Each new discovery adds detail to our understanding of Roman life. But perhaps Pompeii's greatest gift is how it collapses time, allowing us to walk streets that Romans walked, to stand in rooms where they lived, loved, worked, and died, to recognize in their graffiti and artifacts the same human concerns, hopes, and humor that animate our own lives. Pompeii reminds us that across the gulf of 2 millennia, we are not so different from those ancient people who woke up one August morning never knowing if it'd be their last. Modern Italy, for all its venerable history, has a quirky relationship with rules and regulations that can seem bewildering to visitors. Italian law encompasses everything from national statutes to regional regulations to municipal ordinances, and some of these rules range from the sensible to the utterly bizarre. Let's begin in Milan, Italy's financial capital and fashion hub, where an old law technically requires all citizens to smile when in public spaces. This curious mandate dates back to the 19th century, when Milan was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Milanese population, unhappy about foreign rule, expressed their discontent through glum faces and sullen expressions. The occupying authorities, in a move that seems almost comically authoritarian, legislated that gloominess be gone, decreeing that everyone must wear a cheerful expression. The only exemptions were for people attending funerals or visiting hospitals. While this law is no longer enforced, Milan's streets are not patrolled by Smile, police measuring the upturned corners of mouths. It remains technically on the books, a reminder of how governments sometimes attempt to legislate even the most personal expressions of emotion. Travel south to Rome, and you'll encounter rules designed to protect the Eternal City's historic monuments from the depredations of pigeons. Feeding pigeons in Rome is illegal and can result in substantial fines. Because these birds, while charming to tourists eager to recreate scenes from old movies, cause significant damage to ancient structures through their acidic droppings. The authorities have also banned fast food establishments from Rome's historic center since 2000, and the remaining restaurants must offer at least one local Roman dish on their menus as a way of preserving culinary traditions against the homogenizing tide of global food culture. This latter rule reveals an Italian impulse that appears repeatedly in local legislation: the desire to protect tradition, authenticity, and local identity against forces of change. In the town of Eboli in Campania, kissing in cars is prohibited by a local ordinance passed in 2008. Though the truth is less sensational than headlines suggest, the law doesn't actually ban all car kissing, but specifically targets people who engage in displays of affection while their vehicle is moving. A sensible traffic safety measure disguised as prudish overreach by incomplete reporting. The town of Tropea in Calabria takes decorum seriously. With strict rules about beachwear, you can be fined for walking through town in a bikini or shirtless, as such attire is considered appropriate only for the beach itself, not for the historic town center where dignity and proper dress must be maintained. Venice, the city of canals, has banned feeding pigeons in St. Mark's Square for reasons similar to Rome's, and has also outlawed sitting on the ground to eat your lunch. A rule that seems harsh until you consider the sheer number of tourists who visit Venice daily and the resulting impact on public spaces. If everyone claimed a patch of pavement for their picnic. Venice has also forbidden bicycles, roller skates, and skateboards in the historic center, as these vehicles threaten both the safety of pedestrians in the narrow lanes and the integrity of ancient bridges and staircases. The town of Iraklia, a beach resort near Venice, has banned building sandcastles on its beaches, with fines ranging from 25 to 250 euros for violators. The official justification is that sandcastles obstruct passage, though one suspects the real reason has more to do with maintaining a particular aesthetic or preventing the beach from becoming too cluttered and chaotic during peak tourist season. Florence enforces strict rules around its most famous monuments, prohibiting eating or drinking in the immediate vicinity of churches and public buildings, a regulation designed to keep these areas clean and maintain their sacred or civic dignity. In Turin, dog owners must walk their pets at least 3 times per day or risk being fined, a law that seems invasive until you consider it as an animal welfare statute designed to ensure dogs receive adequate exercise and enrichment. The same city requires residents to pick up after their dogs, and has even created a dog DNA database to match abandoned feces to specific dogs, allowing authorities to find owners who don't clean up after their pets. Lucca, a charming walled city in Tuscany, has banned new foreign food establishments within its historic walls to preserve local culinary traditions, meaning you won't find kebab shops or sushi restaurants proliferating in Lucca's medieval streets. These laws, strange as some may seem, reveal deep Italian values, respect for history and tradition, concern for communal space and public aesthetics, and a particular vision of proper behavior that can seem simultaneously admirable and constraining. They also reveal how Italian law operates at multiple levels, with municipalities possessing significant autonomy to regulate behavior within their boundaries. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect is how inconsistently these laws are enforced. Many exist primarily as statements of values or as legal tools, available should authorities decide they're needed. But day-to-day enforcement ranges from strict to essentially non-existent. Italy's relationship with rules has always been complex, characterized by elaborate legislation and creative interpretation, by devotion to tradition and willingness to bend or ignore rules when circumstances warrant. These bizarre laws are just one more manifestation of this complexity, reminders that Italy contains multitudes, contradictions, and a persistent refusal to be easily categorized. Superstition runs deep in Italian culture, woven through daily life with such subtlety that many Italians follow traditional precautions without consciously recognizing them as superstitious behaviors. At the heart of Italian superstition lies the belief in the malocchio, or evil eye, the notion that envy, admiration, or intense focus from another person can cause misfortune, illness, or even death. This belief predates Christianity by millennia, originating in ancient Mediterranean civilizations and adopted by Romans who documented its dangers in texts by writers like Pliny the Elder. The evil eye could be cast intentionally by someone harboring jealousy or malicious intent, or accidentally by someone who simply admired too intensely a beautiful child might attract the evil eye from an admiring stranger, or a successful business might draw envious glances that curdle into harmful energy. To protect against the malocchio, Italians have developed elaborate systems of gestures, amulets, and rituals. The cornicello, or little horn, is a twisted horn-shaped amulet, traditionally made from red coral, gold or silver, worn on necklaces or kept in pockets to ward off evil influences. The gesture known as licorne, extending the index and pinky fingers, while keeping the other fingers curled serves a similar protective function. Though context matters greatly, as this same gesture in different situations can be an insult, a sign of heavy metal fandom, or a ward against evil, depending on how and when it's deployed. If someone suspects they've been struck by the evil eye, various diagnostic and curative rituals exist, many passed down through generations of women who guard these practices as semi-secret knowledge. The most common diagnostic involves dropping olive oil into a bowl of water while reciting prayers. If the oil disperses into small droplets rather than maintaining cohesion, the evil eye is confirmed. The cure requires more prayers, specific gestures, and sometimes additional ritual actions, with the knowledge of these prayers traditionally transmitted from person to person on Christmas Eve, often from older women to younger ones, maintaining a chain of transmission that may stretch back centuries. Beyond the evil eye, Italian superstitions govern everything from food to furniture arrangement. Bread must never be placed upside down on the table, as this inverts the body of Christ and brings bad luck. The origins of this superstition may reach back to medieval times when executioners received their bread upside down to mark them as society's outcasts. The number 17 is considered deeply unlucky because the Roman numeral 17 can be rearranged to form vixi, meaning I have lived or I am dead. Consequently, many Italian hotels skip the 17th floor, and some Italians avoid scheduling important events on the 17th day of any month. However, Friday the 17th carries this unluckiness to an extreme. Considered even more inauspicious than Friday the 13th is in Anglo-American culture. Conversely, the number 13 is actually considered lucky in Italy, inverting the superstition common elsewhere. When raising a toast, Italians believe you must never toast with water, as this brings bad luck. The origin of this belief may relate to ancient Roman practices where water was used in funerary rituals, making it inappropriate for celebrations of life. Similarly, toasting with plastic cups is considered unlucky, perhaps because the lack of the satisfying clink of glass against glass fails to drive away evil spirits, the traditional explanation for why we clink glasses during toasts in the first place. Spilling salt requires immediate counteraction. You must throw a pinch over your left shoulder, as the left side is where the devil is believed to lurk. Breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck, a belief that likely originates from the ancient idea that mirrors captured part of one's soul, and breaking the mirror therefore damaged the soul itself. The number 7 appears because Romans believed that life renewed itself every 7 years. So 7 years represented a complete cycle of misfortune. Cats carry complex superstitious meaning. In Italy, black cats crossing your path from left to right are considered unlucky, though the same cat crossing from right to left may be neutral or even fortunate. And some Italians believe that any cat crossing your path is problematic, requiring you to wait for someone else to cross first and absorb the bad luck. Placing a hat on a bed is absolutely forbidden. As beds are associated with death, people often died in their beds in times before hospitals were common, and combining the imagery of headwear with the resting place creates an omen of mortality. If a single person is swept over by a broom while someone is sweeping, that person will never marry. The origin of this superstition is obscure, but some suggest it relates to brooms' associations with witches and magical practices. Pregnant women occupy a special place in Italian superstition. Their cravings must be satisfied, lest the baby be born with a birthmark shaped like the denied food. A belief that has no medical basis, but remains powerful enough that Italian families often go to considerable lengths to fulfill pregnant women's culinary desires at any hour of day or night. These superstitions reveal deep currents in Italian culture, a persistence of pre-Christian beliefs despite centuries of Catholic dominance, the importance of ritual and symbolic action as ways of managing an uncertain world, and the transmission of traditional knowledge through familial and communal bonds, particularly among women. Modern, educated Italians might laugh at some of these superstitions, but many still observe them, justified with phrases like, "I'm not superstitious, but why take chances?" This pragmatic approach to the irrational reflects a worldview where tradition, even when no longer intellectually credited, still carries emotional and social weight worth respecting. Nested within Rome lies a nation so small you could walk across it in roughly 30 minutes. Vatican City, the world's smallest country by both area and population, covering just 44 hectares, about 1/8 the size of New York's. Central Park. Vatican City became an independent sovereign state through the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which resolved decades of tension between the Kingdom of Italy and the papacy following Italian unification. The Vatican is an absolute monarchy, with the Pope serving as its sovereign ruler, wielding legislative, executive, and judicial authority. Its population hovers around 800 people, most of whom are clergy, officials, or members of the Swiss Guard, the famously colorful uniformed soldiers who have protected popes since 1506. Despite its diminutive size, Vatican City functions as a complete nation with its own postal system, radio station, newspaper, railway station, which serves mainly to receive goods, as there's nowhere to go from the Vatican by train without immediately entering Italy, and even its own top-level internet domain. The Vatican mints its own euro coins, which, while legal tender throughout the Eurozone, are highly sought by collectors and rarely circulate as actual currency because their numismatic value far exceeds their face value. The nation's economy depends largely on donations from Catholics. Worldwide, the famous Peter's Pence collection, along with museum admission fees, souvenir sales, and publication profits. With no natural resources, no manufacturing, and essentially no agriculture, though the Vatican does maintain gardens. This ecclesiastical city-state represents perhaps the purest example of an economy based on faith, tourism, and cultural patrimony. St. Peter's Basilica dominates the Vatican both physically and spiritually. Its enormous dome, designed by Michelangelo, visible from many points across Rome. The Basilica, built over the traditional burial site of St. Peter the Apostle, took 120 years to complete, with construction beginning in 1506 and concluding in 1626. It can accommodate 60,000 people and contains some of Christianity's most important artworks, including Michelangelo's Pieta, sculpted when the artist was only 24 years old, and Bernini's extraordinary Baldacchino, a 29-meter-tall bronze canopy that stands over the papal altar. The Sistine Chapel, the Pope's official residence and the site where new popes are elected through papal conclaves, contains Michelangelo's overwhelming ceiling frescoes, painted between 1508 and 1512, and his Last Judgment fresco on the altar wall, completed decades later. So many visitors crane their necks to view Michelangelo's ceiling that some experience Sistine Chapel syndrome, a form of fainting triggered by the combination of standing with one's head tilted back for extended periods, often in hot, crowded conditions with limited air circulation. The Vatican Museums, a complex of 54 galleries, house one of the world's most extensive art collections, with works spanning from ancient Egyptian artifacts to contemporary religious art, all accumulated over centuries of papal patronage, diplomatic gifts, and strategic acquisitions. The Vatican Library contains some 1.6 million books, including 8,500 incunabula books printed before 1501 and 80,000 manuscripts, some dating to before the fall of Rome, making it one of the most important repositories of historical texts in existence. The Vatican operates the Apostolic Penitentiary, a tribunal that handles matters of conscience too sensitive for normal confession, and the Vatican's secret archives, now renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives, which contains centuries of church correspondence, papal bulls, and historical documents, with portions only recently open to scholars and much material remaining restricted. Vatican City has its own flag, featuring the papal tiara and the crossed keys of heaven, and maintains diplomatic relations with 183 countries, making this microstate a significant diplomatic actor despite having fewer permanent residents than a small apartment building. The Vatican issues its own passports, though only to church officials and a few key employees, and operates its own telephone system with its own country code. It has its own pharmacy, supermarket, and even a small helipad for the Pope's arrivals and departures. Though popes historically traveled little, with the current era of papal globetrotting being a relatively recent phenomenon, the Swiss Guard, recruited exclusively from Catholic Swiss citizens who have completed Swiss military training, wear Renaissance-era uniforms supposedly designed by Michelangelo himself. Though this attribution is probably apocryphal, the colorful striped outfits are actually 20th century creations inspired by Renaissance styles. These guards protect the Pope and the Vatican's entrances with halberds and swords for ceremonial purposes, but they also receive training in modern security and weapons, serving as the Pope's personal protection detail. Vatican City's relationship with Italy is complex. It exists entirely within Italian territory, depends on Italian infrastructure for water, electricity, and access, yet maintains complete sovereignty. When the Pope visits anywhere beyond Vatican City's walls, he technically leaves his own country and enters Italy, requiring coordination between Vatican and Italian authorities. The Vatican has its own legal system based on canon law, though serious crimes are typically transferred to Italian jurisdiction through treaty agreements. It maintains its own prison, though the two-cell facility has rarely been occupied, with serious offenders usually extradited to Italy for prosecution and imprisonment. The Vatican is technically the world's only theocracy, ruled directly by religious authority, and one of only 2 countries, along with Saudi Arabia, where women cannot vote in national elections. Though given that Vatican, citizenship is determined by employment rather than birth or naturalization, and voting rights are tied to specific church offices from which women are excluded. The comparison to democracies is somewhat misleading. The Vatican's influence extends far beyond its tiny territory, with the Pope's words reaching over 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide and his moral authority, making him a significant figure in international affairs, despite commanding no army and controlling no natural resources. This peculiar state exists as a remnant of the Papal States, which once controlled significant portions of central Italy, reduced now to a few square blocks, but retaining symbolic importance as the seat of Catholic authority and earthly headquarters of a spiritual kingdom that acknowledges no borders. Italy's contributions to human innovation and invention far exceed what one might expect from a country of its size, reflecting centuries of scientific inquiry, artistic experimentation, and engineering ingenuity. Let's begin with one of the most fundamental modern instruments, the piano. In 1709, Bartolomeo Cristofori, a harpsichord maker in Florence, invented what he called the gravissembolo col piano e forte, or keyboard with soft and loud, the world's first piano. Cristofori's genius lay in developing a hammer mechanism that struck strings rather than plucking them, allowing the player to control volume through touch playing softly, piano, or loudly, forte. This innovation transformed music, enabling the expressive dynamics that characterized Romantic-era compositions. And every piano from Mozart's time to modern concert grands descends directly from Cristofori's Florentine workshop. Italy also gave the world the battery Alessandro Volta, invented the voltaic pile in 1800, the first chemical battery capable of producing steady electrical current, a discovery so fundamental that we named the unit of electrical potential volt in his honor. Guglielmo Marconi, working in Bologna in the 1890s, developed practical long-distance radio communication, sending the first radio signals across the Atlantic in 1901, launching the communications revolution that would eventually lead to modern telecommunications. The telephone itself, while usually credited to Alexander Graham Bell, was arguably invented first by Antonio Meucci, an Italian immigrant to America who filed a caveat for his Teletrofono in 1871, 5 years before Bell's patent, though Meucci lacked the resources to maintain his claim, and Bell received the credit and commercial success. The eyeglass, that simple but transformative invention that restored clear vision to millions, was invented in northern Italy around 1290, with the exact inventor unknown, but Venetian craftsmen quickly perfecting and disseminating the technology. The typewriter, though developed simultaneously by inventors in multiple countries, reached its first commercially successful form through Italian innovation, with Pellegrino Turri creating a mechanical typing device in the early 1800s. The jacuzzi, the whirlpool bath that bears its inventor's name, was developed by Roy Jacuzzi in 1948, initially as hydrotherapy equipment for his son, who suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, before becoming a luxury consumer product. Italy's greatest gift to the world, according to many, is the espresso machine. Angelo Moriondo of Turin patented the first espresso machine in 1884, though it was Milanese inventors Luigi Bezzira and Desiderio Pavoni who refined the technology. In the early 1900s, creating machines that could brew coffee quickly under pressure, producing the concentrated, aromatic shot of caffeine that fuels modern life. The tradition of Italian innovation extends into transportation, with Italy producing some of the world's most celebrated automobiles: Ferrari, Lamborghini, Maserati, Alfa Romeo brands that represent not just transportation but performance, beauty, and engineering excellence. Enzo Ferrari founded his company in 1947, creating cars that dominated racing circuits and became symbols of automotive aspiration, while Ferruccio Lamborghini, originally a tractor manufacturer, founded his supercar company in 1963 partly out of frustration with Ferrari's customer service, proving that spite can be a remarkable motivator for innovation. Beyond vehicles, Italy contributed the automatic machine gun, the Villa Perosa, developed in 1914, and the ice cream cone's ancestor, with Italian immigrants bringing gelato to America and innovating in frozen desserts. Italians developed the first mechanical calculator, with Giovanni Poleni creating a working calculating machine in 1709, and contributed numerous innovations to aviation, with companies like Caproni and Piaggio, which later became famous for the Vespa scooter, producing pioneering aircraft. The Vespa scooter itself, designed by Corradino Descanio and manufactured by Piaggio starting in 1946, revolutionized personal transportation, making motorized travel affordable and stylish for millions of Europeans in the post-war years. Italian innovation extends into food technology and culinary arts. Though discussing whether pasta itself is an Italian invention requires nuance, while similar noodles existed in Asia, the forms of pasta we associate with Italian cuisine evolved in Italy over centuries, with the development of dried pasta, which could be stored and shipped, proving particularly significant. Italy's contribution to agriculture includes the development of various cheese-making techniques, though whether Italians invented cheese or simply perfected methods introduced from elsewhere remains debated. What's indisputable is that Italy produces over 2,500 distinct traditional cheeses, from Parmigiano Reggiano to Mozzarella di Bufala to Gorgonzola, each protected by specific production standards and often by designation of origin laws. Italy has also produced 15 Nobel Prize winners in physics, chemistry, literature, and medicine, with Italian scientists contributing to quantum mechanics, nuclear physics, and medicine throughout the 20th century. This record of innovation reflects Italy's long tradition of connecting art and science, beauty and function, theoretical knowledge and practical application, the same impulse that produced Renaissance polymath Leonardo da Vinci, who designed flying machines, anatomical studies, architectural plans, and painting masterpieces with equal facility. Italian innovation continues today in fields like fashion, industrial design, and aerospace, with companies and individuals maintaining the nation's tradition of combining aesthetic sensibility with technical excellence, proving that innovation need not sacrifice beauty for function. Italians developed the first mechanical calculator, with Giovanni Poleni creating a working calculating machine in 1709, and contributed numerous innovations to aviation, with companies like Caproni and Piaggio, which later became famous for the Vespa scooter, producing pioneering aircraft. The Vespa scooter itself, designed by Corradino d'Ascanio and manufactured by Piaggio starting in 1946, revolutionized personal transportation, making motorized travel affordable and stylish for millions of Europeans in the post-war years. Italian innovation extends into food technology and culinary arts. Though discussing whether pasta itself is an Italian invention requires nuance, while similar noodles existed in Asia, the forms of pasta we associate with Italian cuisine evolved in Italy over centuries, with the development of dried pasta, which could be stored and shipped, proving particularly significant. Italy's contribution to agriculture includes the development of various cheese-making techniques, though whether Italians invented cheese or simply perfected methods introduced from elsewhere remains debated. What's indisputable is that Italy produces over 2,500 distinct traditional cheeses, from Parmigiano Reggiano to Mozzarella di Bufala to Gorgonzola, each protected by specific production standards and often by designation of origin laws. Italy has also produced 15 Nobel Prize winners in physics, chemistry, literature, and medicine, with Italian scientists contributing to quantum mechanics, nuclear physics, and medicine throughout the 20th century. This record of innovation reflects Italy's long tradition of connecting art and science, beauty and function, theoretical knowledge and practical application, the same impulse that produced Renaissance polymath Leonardo da Vinci, who designed flying machines, anatomical studies, architectural plans, and painting masterpieces with equal facility. Italian innovation continues today in fields like fashion, industrial design, and aerospace, with companies and individuals maintaining the nation's tradition of combining aesthetic sensibility with technical excellence, proving that innovation need not sacrifice beauty for function. When travelers think of leaning towers in Italy, the Leaning Tower of Pisa inevitably dominates imagination. That famous campanile tilting at a 3.97-degree angle, drawing millions of visitors annually to pose for photographs where they pretend to push or hold up the tower. But the Leaning Tower of Pisa, iconic though it may be, represents just one example of a widespread Italian phenomenon: the proliferation of towers that don't stand quite straight. The Pisa Campanile began leaning almost immediately after construction started in 1173, as the soft clay and fine sand beneath its foundation proved inadequate to support the marble structure's weight. Construction halted for nearly a century because of wars, which inadvertently saved the tower by allowing the soil to settle and stabilize. Work resumed multiple times over 2 centuries, with engineers attempting to compensate for the lean by building subsequent floors slightly taller on one side, creating a subtle curve that makes the tower not quite a simple tilt but something stranger, a structure that leans and curves simultaneously. By the time of completion in 1372, the tower already leaned significantly, and it continued tilting gradually over the centuries, accelerating in the 20th century to the point where collapse seemed imminent. Engineers stabilized the tower in the 1990s through a complex process of soil extraction, temporarily attaching 600 tons of lid counterweights and carefully removing soil from beneath the raised side, allowing the tower to settle backward slightly. Today, the lean is stable at about 3.97 degrees from vertical, reduced from its maximum of 5.5 degrees, and engineers believe the tower will remain stable for at least another 200 years. During World War II, Allied forces planned to destroy the tower because German forces were using it as an observation post. But the officer who approached Pisa to confirm the tower's location was so moved by its beauty that he refused to order its destruction, a decision that preserved one of Italy's most recognizable landmarks. Yet Pisa's famous tower has numerous lesser-known siblings scattered across Italy. In Bologna stands the Tor Garisenda, a 12th century tower that leans at a more dramatic angle than Pisa's 4 degrees from vertical, but receives a fraction of the tourist attention. Bologna once bristled with towers, aristocratic families competing to build the tallest as displays of wealth and power during the medieval period, with towers reaching heights of 100 meters. Of the 180 towers that once punctured Bologna's skyline, only about 20 survive, with two, the Tor Garisenda and the Tor degli Asinelli, remaining particularly prominent, both testifying to the competitive nature of medieval Italian urban society. Venice contains leaning towers as well, most notably the campanile of the Church of Santo Stefano, which tilts visibly, its foundation, like so much of Venice, sinking gradually into the lagoon. The town of San Gimignano in Tuscany, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserves 14 of its original 72 medieval towers, creating a medieval Manhattan skyline where multiple towers, some leaning slightly, create a distinctive profile. These towers serve both practical defensive purposes and symbolic functions, their height representing family prestige, their number reflecting the town's wealth and competition. The towers of San Gimignano survived largely because the town's economic decline in the 14th century froze development, preventing the tower's destruction as they became too expensive to maintain and too old-fashioned to seem worth preserving, until eventually their antiquity itself became valuable, transforming them from obsolete defensive structures into tourist attractions. Italian towers lean for various reasons: inadequate foundations on soft soil, uneven settling of ground beneath asymmetric structures, earthquakes that shifted foundations without completely toppling the buildings, and simply the tremendous challenge of building tall structures with medieval technology and without modern engineering understanding of load distribution, soil mechanics, and structural stress. The miracle is not that some Italian towers lean, but that so many remain standing at all, testifying to the skill of medieval builders who, working without steel reinforcement, modern cement, or structural calculations, nonetheless created stone structures that have endured for 700 or 800 years. Italian architectural ambition wasn't limited to towers. The nation contains an extraordinary concentration of architectural innovation and experimentation. Florence's Duomo, designed by Filippo Brunelleschi and completed in 1436, features a dome so vast that no one believed it could be built without collapsing under its own weight. Brunelleschi solved the problem through ingenious techniques, using a double shell design, a herringbone brick pattern for stability, and machinery he invented specifically for the construction. The dome's completion was a triumph of Renaissance engineering, proving that ancient Roman building techniques could not only be matched, but exceeded. Venice's architecture, built on millions of wooden piles driven into the mud of the lagoon, represents another triumph of engineering over hostile conditions, creating a city where buildings seem to float on water, connected by bridges over canals that serve as streets. The Amalfi Coast's towns cling to cliffs at seemingly impossible angles. Their houses stacked vertically on steep slopes overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, accessible by winding roads and countless stairways. These architectural achievements reflect not just technical skill, but Italian determination to build beautiful things in challenging locations, to transform inhospitable environments through human ingenuity and aesthetic ambition, to create beauty especially when practical considerations argue against it. This attitude continues in modern Italian architecture and design, where form and function combine in objects from Alessi kitchenware to Vespa scooters to Ferraris. Maintaining a tradition of design excellence that treats even mundane objects as opportunities for beauty. Italy's boot stretches from the Alps in the north down through temperate zones to the semi-arid Mediterranean climate of the south, creating diverse ecosystems that support remarkable biodiversity. Though centuries of human habitation have dramatically altered the natural landscape, the Italian wolf, Canis lupus italicus, serves as Italy's unofficial national animal. Though it nearly went extinct in the 1970s, when the population dropped to perhaps 100 individuals, confined to remote mountain areas of the Apennines. Conservation efforts have allowed wolf populations to recover to several thousand individuals. Though this success has brought conflicts with shepherds who lose livestock to wolf predation, recreating ancient tensions between human economic interests and wild predators. The wolf's significance to Italian identity stems partly from the myth of Rome's founding, with Romulus and Remus supposedly raised by a she-wolf after being abandoned as infants, making the wolf both a symbol of the city and a reminder of the wild origins underlying civilization. The Alps, forming Italy's northern border, contain populations of animals rarely found elsewhere in Western Europe. Ibex with enormous curved horns, scaling cliffs that seem impossibly steep, chamois bounding across mountainsides, brown bears in the Trentino region, though Italian bears are endangered, numbering only a few dozen, and lynx, reintroduced after being hunted to extinction in Italy in the early 20th century. The Apennine Mountains, running down the spine of the peninsula, harbor the endangered Marsican brown bear, with only 50 or so individuals surviving in central Italian mountains. Italy's coastal and marine ecosystems support dolphins and whales in the Mediterranean, including fin whales and sperm whales in the Ligurian Sea's Pelagos Sanctuary, where deep waters create feeding grounds for these marine giants. The islands Sicily, Sardinia, and numerous smaller islands contain endemic species found nowhere else. The Sardinian deer, smaller than mainland red deer, the Sardinian pika, a rabbit-like creature once thought extinct, and various endemic reptiles, including wall lizards found on single small islands and nowhere else on Earth. Italy's avifauna includes alpine species like the golden eagle, Mediterranean species like the Audouin's gull, and wetland species that stop in Italian marshes and lagoons during migration. The Po Delta and Venice Lagoon provide critical habitat for herons, egrets, and countless other water birds. Italy's forests, though much diminished from their ancient extent, still cover about 1/3 of the country, with beech forests in the mountains, oak forests in lower elevations, and Mediterranean massif dense scrubby vegetation dominated by aromatic herbs, evergreen shrubs, and small trees covering much of the south. Italian flora includes over 6,700 species, with high levels of endemism, particularly in the Alps and on islands. The Alps contain alpine flowers that bloom in brief mountain summers, edelweiss, alpine poppy, gentians and brilliant blues, and countless others adapted to high-altitude, cold, and short-growing seasons. Italy's agricultural landscapes, while technically human-created, have existed for so long that they've developed their own ecosystems, with olive groves, vineyards, and grain fields supporting adapted plant and animal communities. The Chianina cattle, an ancient Italian breed used by Etruscans and Romans, survives today, famous for producing bistecca alla Fiorentina, the enormous T-bone steaks beloved in Tuscany. These white cattle, possibly the largest breed in the world, can weigh over 1,800 kilograms and stand 2 meters tall at the shoulder, looking more like creatures from prehistoric megafauna than modern livestock. The Italian Greyhound, a diminutive elegant dog breed, originated in Italy over 2,000 years ago, valued by Roman nobility and later Renaissance courts for its speed, beauty, and affectionate nature. Italy's challenges in conserving biodiversity reflect tensions present across much of Europe. How to balance human economic activities, agricultural traditions that have shaped landscapes for millennia, and the need to preserve wild species and ecosystems. Italy's population density, particularly in the Po Valley and along coasts, limits space for wildlife, while agriculture and urbanization fragment habitats. Climate change threatens alpine ecosystems as warming temperatures allow trees to colonize higher elevations, reducing habitat for species adapted to treeless alpine zones, while also threatening the glaciers that feed Italian rivers and support ecosystems downstream. Invasive species, introduced either deliberately or accidentally, compete with native flora and fauna. Marine ecosystems face overfishing, pollution, and warming waters. Yet Italy has also made conservation progress, establishing national parks and protected areas, reintroducing locally extinct species, protecting marine areas, and developing agritourism and ecotourism that provide economic incentives for conservation. The Italian landscape remains beautiful, though it's a beauty largely shaped by human hands over millennia, with even seemingly wild areas bearing traces of past human use. This long human presence has advantages Italians have learned over centuries how to maintain productive landscapes that can endure, creating systems of terraces, irrigation, crop rotation, and animal husbandry that work with rather than against ecological constraints. The challenge for modern Italy is maintaining this balance while accommodating the demands of industrial agriculture, urban sprawl, and climate change, preserving both cultural landscapes and wild spaces in a small, densely populated nation where every square meter has value and every choice involves trade-offs. Italy's artistic legacy defines Western culture so thoroughly that it's difficult to overstate Italian influence on how we think about art, beauty, and aesthetic achievement. The Renaissance, beginning in 14th century Italy and flowering throughout the 15th and 16th centuries, fundamentally transformed European art, moving from medieval styles toward naturalism, perspective, human-centered themes, and classical revival. Florence served as the Renaissance epicenter, producing Donatello, who revolutionized sculpture by creating freestanding statues of humans in realistic poses. Botticelli, whose Birth of Venus and Primavera combined classical mythology with ethereal beauty. And Filippo Brunelleschi, who developed mathematical perspective, allowing artists to create the illusion of three-dimensional space on flat surfaces. But the Renaissance's greatest figures transcended single cities or even single disciplines. Leonardo da Vinci, born near Florence in 1452, embodied the Renaissance ideal of the polymath, mastering painting, sculpture, anatomy, engineering, botany, and countless other fields. His Mona Lisa, with her enigmatic expression, remains the world's most famous painting, housed in the Louvre, but forever associated with Italian genius. Leonardo's notebooks reveal a mind constantly inquiring, constantly experimenting, sketching flying machines centuries before airplanes, designing canal systems and bridges, studying human anatomy through dissection, illegal at the time, and considering the mechanics of everything from water flow to the flight of birds. Michelangelo Buonarroti, born in 1475, achieved mastery in sculpture, painting, and architecture. His David, carved from a single block of marble, represents idealized human form, standing over 5 meters tall in Florence's Accademia Gallery. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, which Michelangelo painted while lying on scaffolding over 4 years, depicts biblical scenes and complex compositions featuring hundreds of figures. A physical and artistic achievement that seems superhuman. Later, Michelangelo designed the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, bringing architectural genius to match his visual arts mastery. Raphael, the third of the Renaissance's trinity of masters, died young at 37, but produced hundreds of works, including the School of Athens fresco in the Vatican, which depicts history's great philosophers and scientists gathered in an idealized architectural space, epitomizing Renaissance values of knowledge, beauty, and classical wisdom. Caravaggio, working in the late Renaissance and early Baroque period, revolutionized painting through his dramatic use of chiaroscuro, extreme contrasts of light and dark, and his commitment to naturalism, showing religious figures as ordinary people rather than idealized saints. His paintings scandalized contemporaries with their realism and emotional intensity, with models who looked like they'd been pulled from Rome's streets rather than heaven, creating a new standard for emotional directness in art. Titian dominated Venetian painting, developing techniques of color and brushwork that influenced artists for centuries. Italian art continued evolving through the Baroque period, with architects and sculptors like Bernini creating emotionally charged works that transformed churches into theatrical spaces designed to inspire awe and devotion. Italy gave birth to opera, the art form that combines music, drama, poetry, and visual spectacle into integrated performance. Opera emerged in Florence around 1600, with composers like Monteverdi establishing the form. But it was in 19th century Italy that opera reached its peak with Rossini, Verdi, and Puccini. Giuseppe Verdi composed operas like La Traviata, Rigoletto, and Aida that remain repertory staples, while Giacomo Puccini created emotionally intense works like La Bohème, Tosca, and Madama Butterfly that continue moving audiences to tears. Italian opera houses La Scala in Milan, La Fenice in Venice, Teatro Massimo in Palermo became institutions where music and social performance intersected, where audiences came to see and be seen as much as to hear music. Italy also pioneered ballet, with Catherine de' Medici bringing Italian dance masters to France in the 16th century, establishing traditions that would flower in later centuries. Italian musical terminology dominates classical music worldwide. Allegro, andante, crescendo, diminuendo, forte, piano. Presto. These Italian words direct musicians in every language, testimony to Italy's foundational role in Western classical music. Beyond opera, Italy produced countless composers, from Vivaldi, whose Four Seasons remains among classical music's most recognized works, to Paganini, whose violin virtuosity was so extreme that contemporaries suspected demonic assistance. Italian contributions to literature include Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, written in Italian rather than Latin, helping establish Italian as a literary language. Petrarch's sonnets, which influenced poetry for centuries. Boccaccio's Decameron, a framed narrative collection that influenced Chaucer and countless others. Machiavelli's The Prince, a founding text of political science. And later works by Leopardi, Manzoni, and Svevo. Italy's cultural influence extends to theater, with Commedia dell'arte developing in the 16th century as improvised comedy, featuring stock characters like Harlequin and Pantalone, influencing theater across Europe and eventually shaping everything from Shakespeare to modern sketch comedy. Italy contributed the Pinocchio story, written by Carlo Collodi in 1881, which became a foundational children's tale exploring themes of conscience, growth, and transformation through the adventures of a wooden puppet who becomes a real boy. This concentration of artistic genius in a relatively small geographic area over several centuries remains remarkable, suggesting that cultural, economic, and political conditions combined to create an environment where artistic innovation could flourish. The Renaissance emerged from Italy's fragmented political landscape, where competing city-states and courts sought to outdo each other in artistic patronage. From Italy's position as a trading nexus between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, bringing wealth and exposure to different cultures. From the rediscovery of classical texts and artifacts, inspiring new thinking about human potential and achievement. And from the development of patronage systems, where wealthy families and institutions commissioned artworks, supporting artists and creating demand for their work. Italy's artistic legacy continues influencing global culture, with Italian design aesthetics in fashion, industrial design, and architecture maintaining the nation's reputation for excellence in visual and material culture. Modern Italian artists like Modigliani, De Chirico, and Fontana continued Italy's tradition of innovation, while contemporary architects and designers maintain Italy's position at the forefront of aesthetic achievement, proving that Italy's relationship with beauty, form, and artistic expression extends beyond historical accomplishment to ongoing creative vitality. As night deepens and our journey through Italy's peculiarities draws toward its close, perhaps what stands out most is not any single fact, but the accumulation of strangeness, beauty, contradiction, and vitality that defines this ancient and modern land. Italy refuses simple categorization. It is volcanic and stable, traditional and innovative, deeply regional and nationally unified, densely populated and harboring wild spaces, conservative in some ways and radically experimental in others. The facts we've explored tonight, from molten mountains to frozen cities in volcanic ash, from laws requiring smiles to superstitions about bread, from the world's smallest country to towers that won't stand straight, reveal a place where human civilization has layered itself so thickly across the landscape that every square meter contains stories, where even the ordinary holds historical depth, where the simple act of eating a meal connects you to traditions refined over centuries. Italy's peculiarity lies partly in its age. Few places have been continuously inhabited and culturally significant for as long as the Italian peninsula, creating depth of tradition and complexity of identity that newer nations cannot match. It lies partly in geography, the boot's position between Europe and Africa, between Alps and Mediterranean, between East and West, made Italy a crossroads where influences mixed and transformed. It lies partly in the fragmentation that kept Italy politically divided for so long, allowing different regions to develop distinctive identities that persist despite unification. And it lies partly in Italian values that prioritize beauty, tradition, family, local identity, and living well over standardization, efficiency, or uniformity. These values create a nation where people care deeply about how coffee is made, where bread is placed, whether a tower leans, whether a law from the 19th century might still technically apply, and whether ancient superstitions might contain wisdom worth respecting even if we no longer believe their literal truth. Italy's relationship with its own past differs from how many nations engage with history. For Italians, history isn't something that happened and ended, but a living presence. A landscape they inhabit, ruins they walk past daily, traditions they practice in modified forms, dialects containing words from Latin, Greek, Arabic, and ancient pre-Roman languages. When archaeologists discover new rooms in Pompeii, they're not recovering some distant civilization, but revealing how ancestors lived. The graffiti on those walls was written by people whose cultural descendants inhabit Naples today, whose basic life concerns around food, family, politics, and entertainment remain recognizable across 2 millennia. This continuity creates a particular Italian sensibility, a long view that can seem fatalistic or philosophical, depending on your perspective. An understanding that empires rise and fall, that what seems permanent will pass. That perhaps making today beautiful and enjoyable matters more than planning too far ahead when volcanoes, earthquakes, invading armies, or simple historical change can upend everything regardless of plans. Yet this philosophical acceptance coexists with passionate engagement. Italians argue intensely about politics, soccer, food preparation, the proper way to make coffee. Whether pineapple belongs on pizza, it absolutely does not, according to Italian consensus. And countless other matters where they invest tremendous emotional energy. This combination of long-view historical consciousness and passionate present engagement characterizes Italian culture, creating people who can simultaneously shrug at governmental instability, because governments always collapse eventually, while arguing vehemently about which town makes the best prosciutto. Italy's influence on world culture extends far beyond its borders and its historical period. Italian immigrants spread Italian culture globally, establishing Italian neighborhoods in cities from New York to Buenos Aires to Melbourne, bringing Italian food, traditions, and values to new contexts. Pizza, pasta, espresso, cappuccino, gelato, tiramisu, these Italian creations have become global staples, though often modified in ways that would horrify Italian purists. The Italian-American experience created its own distinct culture, maintaining connection to Italian roots while adapting to American contexts, producing new traditions that neither wholly Italian nor wholly American, but something genuinely hybrid. Italian design aesthetics influence everything from fashion to furniture to automobiles, with Italian style suggesting elegance, craftsmanship, and aesthetic sophistication. The Italian language, though spoken by only about 65 million people as a native language, has global cultural significance through opera, classical music, art history, and culinary terminology. Italian cinema, particularly the neorealist films of the 1940s and 50s, influenced world filmmaking, while directors like Fellini and Antonioni pushed cinema toward art and psychological complexity. Contemporary Italian contributions to science, medicine, and technology continue, though perhaps less visibly than cultural contributions, with Italian physicists, engineers, and researchers working at institutions worldwide. As we conclude our exploration of Italy's weird and wonderful facts. As sleep perhaps beckons or has already claimed you, consider what these peculiarities reveal about human creativity, adaptation, and the capacity to transform hostile or challenging environments into places of beauty and meaning. The volcanic mountains that threaten destruction also create fertile soil where grapes and olives flourish. The earthquakes that topple buildings also shape the geological foundations of hills where ancient cities perch. The political fragmentation that prevented Italian unity for centuries also created cultural diversity and artistic competition that produced the Renaissance. The superstitions that seem irrational also create social bonds and transmit traditional knowledge across generations. The bizarre laws that appear silly often reflect values worth considering: respect for public space, protection of tradition, care for animals, maintenance of beauty. Italy's tower-building families competed destructively, creating structures that sometimes collapsed and killed people, but also produced architectural innovations and a skyline that centuries later draws millions of tourists. Human impulses toward competition, display, and achievement can be both foolish and magnificent, sometimes simultaneously, and Italy contains both aspects in abundance. The boot-shaped peninsula stretching into the Mediterranean has been home to human societies for thousands of years, has seen empires rise and fall, has weathered volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, foreign invasions and civil wars, periods of wealth and poverty, unity and fragmentation, and through all of this has maintained distinctive identity, cultural continuity, and commitment to living well and making beautiful things. These weird facts we've explored tonight are not trivia, but windows into deeper truths about how humans create meaning, maintain tradition, adapt to change, and find ways to thrive even in difficult circumstances. Before we draw our journey to a close, let us wander through a few more corners of Italian peculiarity that deserve attention. Consider Italy's relationship with wine, which extends far beyond mere consumption into the realm of public art and accessibility. In the Abruzzo region, along the Camino di San Tommaso pilgrimage route, stands the Fontana del Vino, a free wine fountain where pilgrims and visitors can help themselves to local red wine 24 hours a day. This remarkable installation connects ancient traditions of hospitality along pilgrimage routes with modern tourism, offering a literal fountain of wine to anyone who passes by. The concept seems almost too perfect, too Italian to be true, yet there it stands, dispensing wine to thousands annually, maintained by a local winery as both marketing and public service. The fountain exemplifies a particularly Italian approach to life where pleasure, tradition, and community intersect, where something that could be purely commercial becomes also an act of generosity and cultural expression. Italy produces more wine than any other country on Earth, approximately 42 to 50 million hectoliters annually, accounting for roughly 25% of global production. This staggering output reflects millennia of winemaking tradition, with evidence of grape cultivation and wine production in Italy dating back to before Roman times. Every region produces wine, with over 350 officially recognized grape varieties and thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about which grapes grow best in which soils, which elevation, which microclimate. Italian wine classification systems protect traditional production methods and regional identities. With DOCG designation representing the highest quality level, reserved for wines from specific regions produced according to strict regulations regarding grape varieties, yields, aging, and production methods. The Italian reverence for wine parallels their devotion to pasta, that fundamental Italian staple that exists in hundreds of shapes, each supposedly designed for specific sauces or preparations. The saying, "form follows function," applies literally to Italian pasta design, with shapes engineered to interact optimally with particular sauces. Long, thin pasta like spaghetti or linguine bears with light olive, oil-based sauces or delicate seafood preparations, where the sauce can coat the pasta strands without overwhelming them. Wider, flatter pastas like pappardelle or tagliatelle accompany rich meat rags, their substantial form standing up to heavy sauces, while providing surface area for sauce to cling. Tubular pastas like penne, rigatoni, or ziti trap thicker sauces inside their hollows, with ridges providing additional grip. Short twisted shapes like fusilli catch chunky sauces and vegetables in their spirals. Tiny pastina goes into soups, while giant shells and tubes like cannelloni or conchiglione are designed for stuffing. This diversity reflects not just culinary creativity, but centuries of regional development, with different areas creating pasta shapes suited to local ingredients, cooking traditions, and preferences. Northern Italy traditionally favored fresh egg pasta, softer and richer than the dried durum wheat pasta of the south, where hot, dry climate and grain cultivation made dried pasta more practical. The average Italian consumes approximately 23 kilograms of pasta annually, far exceeding consumption in any other country, with pasta forming a central component of Italian diet and identity. Yet despite pasta's centrality to Italian cuisine and global perception of Italian food, pasta as Italians know it only reached its current forms over centuries of evolution, with different regions developing distinct preparations, shapes, and sauce combinations that remain fiercely defended as authentic local traditions today. Italian food culture extends beyond specific dishes to embrace the entire experience of eating as social and cultural practice. The concept of fare una bella figura, making a good impression or cutting a fine figure, extends to food presentation, table settings, and dining behavior. With Italians paying attention to aesthetic details, it might seem excessive to outsiders, but represent respect for food, guests, and the social nature of eating. Meals follow traditional structures with distinct courses: antipasto, primo, usually pasta or risotto; secondo, meat or fish; contorno, vegetables; and dolce, dessert, though not every meal includes every course. And everyday family meals are typically simpler than formal dinners or restaurant experiences. But the structure reflects a philosophy of eating where different flavors and textures progress through the meal, building to a satisfying conclusion, rather than presenting everything simultaneously, as in many other culinary traditions. The passeggiata, the evening stroll after dinner, where people walk through their town or neighborhood, serves both digestive and social functions, allowing people to encounter neighbors, display fashion choices, socialize with friends, and participate in community life. This ritual, still practiced in many Italian towns and cities, especially in smaller communities and in southern Italy, represents a public social world that has diminished in many other modern societies, where evening entertainment occurs primarily indoors or in private spaces. The passeggiata's persistence reveals something about Italian values around community, appearance, and the importance of being seen and seeing others as part of daily life. The Italian relationship with time differs markedly from Northern European or American conceptions, with punctuality often flexible and schedules sometimes suggestions rather than rigid commitments. Business hours in much of Italy still reflect traditional patterns where shops close for several hours in the afternoon, allowing proprietors and employees to go home for lunch and rest during the hottest part of the day, reopening in late afternoon and remaining open into evening. This schedule, called riposo or pausa pranzo, frustrates tourists accustomed to continuous shopping hours, but reflects a lifestyle that prioritizes rest, family meals, and work-life balance over maximum commercial availability. In many small towns, everything except perhaps a bar or two closes between roughly 1 p.m. and 4 p.m., creating a quiet interlude when streets empty and people retreat into homes. Dinner typically occurs later than in many other countries, often not beginning until 8 or 9 p.m., especially in summer and in southern regions, with meals extending over hours as courses progress leisurely and conversation flows. This relaxed approach to dining reflects values that prioritize pleasure, social connection, and the quality of the experience over efficiency or speed. The Italian phrase, piano piano, slowly, captures an attitude toward time that accepts slower pace as natural and even desirable. Though this stereotype of Italian temporal flexibility exists in tension with Italian capabilities for precision, punctuality, and efficiency when circumstances demand, as anyone who's witnessed Italian trains running on schedule or Italian engineering producing precision machinery can attest. Italian regional diversity remains striking despite over a century of political unity, with linguistic, culinary, and cultural differences that can seem almost incomprehensible from outside. The Italian language is taught in schools and used in media represents a standardized version based primarily on Tuscan dialect. But regional dialects or languages spoken at home and among friends can differ so dramatically from standard Italian that mutual comprehension becomes difficult or impossible. Sicilian, Venetian, Neapolitan, Ligurian, Sardinian, these are not mere accents, but distinct linguistic systems with their own grammar, vocabulary, and historical development, some predating unified Italian and descending from different Romance language roots. An elderly person from rural Sicily speaking Sicilian might struggle to communicate with an elderly person from rural Veneto speaking Venetian, despite both nominally being Italian. This linguistic diversity reflects Italy's historical fragmentation, where regions developed independently for centuries, but it also creates challenges for national unity and education. Younger generations increasingly speak primarily Standard Italian, with dialects declining. Though regional accents persist and local words remain embedded in Italian language, especially for food items, where regions insist on local names for specific products. Regional cuisines differ so dramatically that Italian food, as a unified concept, almost makes no sense. Sicilian cuisine bears little resemblance to Piedmontese cuisine. Roman food differs greatly from Milanese, with each region proudly maintaining distinct traditions, ingredients, and preparations. These differences aren't merely variations on common themes, but represent fundamentally different culinary philosophies reflecting different histories, climates, agricultural products, and influences from neighboring regions or foreign powers that controlled specific areas. Sicily's cuisine shows Arabic influences in spices, sweets, and preparations from centuries of Muslim rule, while northern Italian cooking reflects Austrian, French, and Swiss influences from proximity and historical connections. Coastal regions naturally emphasize seafood, while inland mountain regions feature more game, dairy, and preserved meats. Southern Italian cuisine traditionally relied more heavily on vegetables, legumes, and pasta due to historical poverty, while northern regions had greater access to meat, butter, and fresh pasta. This regional pride extends beyond food to sports, particularly soccer, where local teams inspire passionate loyalty and intercity rivalries date back centuries. When Florence plays against Siena or Rome faces Lazio, or Milan meets Inter, these matches aren't mere athletic competitions, but enactments of historical identities, ancient rivalries, and civic pride, with fan behavior sometimes achieving intensities that would shock outsiders. Italian Tifosi fans take their support seriously, creating elaborate choreographed displays, singing club anthems, waving enormous flags, and sometimes engaging in violence that has led to strict stadium regulations and police presence at matches. This passion for local teams over national identity partly reflects Italy's fragmented history, where city-states competed for centuries before unification imposed national structure. That many Italians still regard as somewhat artificial, or at least secondary to regional identity. When Italy's national team competes in international tournaments, Italians unite behind the Azzurri. But domestic competition remains primarily about local and regional pride rather than national unity. Italian contributions to Western philosophy and political thought deserve mention among the nation's intellectual exports. Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, written in the early 16th century, provided ruthlessly realistic analysis of political power, arguing that successful rulers must be willing to act immorally when circumstances require, that the ends can justify the means, that appearing virtuous matters more than actually being virtuous. Machiavelli's name became an adjective Machiavellian synonymous with cunning, manipulation, and a moral pursuit of power, though Machiavelli himself was attempting to provide practical advice based on observation of how political power actually functions rather than how idealists wish it would function. His work influenced political thinking for centuries, contributing to modern political science's empirical, analytical approach rather than purely normative theorizing. Thomas Aquinas, though born in mainland Italy near Naples, represents medieval philosophy's synthesis of Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy, producing massive systematic works attempting to reconcile faith and reason, revelation, and philosophy. Giambattista Vico developed cyclical theories of history, arguing that civilizations rise and fall in predictable patterns, with ages of gods, heroes, and men repeating as societies evolve, decline, and begin again. Cesare Beccaria's On Crimes and Punishments influenced criminal justice reform throughout Europe and America by arguing against torture, capital punishment, and arbitrary judicial procedures, advocating for proportionate punishment and fair legal procedures. Antonio Gramsci developed theories of cultural hegemony, analyzing how dominant groups maintain power not just through force, but through cultural institutions that shape consciousness and normalize existing power arrangements, influencing later Marxist and postmodern thought. These thinkers contributed to Western intellectual traditions, with Italian philosophy, like Italian art and literature, forming essential components of European cultural heritage. Italian fashion represents another domain where Italy maintains global leadership, with Milan standing alongside Paris as one of fashion's capital cities. Italian fashion houses, Gucci, Prada, Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Armani, Valentino, Fendi dominate luxury markets, representing not just clothing but lifestyle, status, and aesthetic sophistication. Italian fashion emphasizes craftsmanship, quality materials, and elegant design rather than cutting-edge avant-garde experimentation, though Italian designers certainly innovate within boundaries of wearability and classical proportions. The tradition of Italian tailoring, particularly for men's suits, represents centuries of accumulated expertise in cutting, fitting, and constructing garments that drape properly and enhance the wearer's appearance. Naples and Rome particularly maintain traditions of bespoke tailoring, where master craftsmen create custom suits through dozens of fittings and adjustments, producing garments that fit like second skin. Italian leather goods, shoes, bags, belts, jackets benefit from centuries of tanning and leatherworking tradition, with regions like Tuscany specializing in leather production and Florence serving as a center for leather crafts. Italian fashions. Influence extends beyond haute couture to everyday style, with Italians generally paying more attention to appearance and dress than citizens of many other nations, with even casual clothing selected and combined with care. The concept of bella figura, making a good impression, applies particularly to dress and appearance, with sloppiness or carelessness in one's presentation regarded not just as aesthetic failure, but as showing disrespect to others and diminishing one's dignity. This attention to appearance can seem superficial or vain to outsiders, but reflects values around beauty, self-presentation, and the visual nature of social life that Italians take seriously. Italy continues evolving, facing challenges from climate change threatening alpine glaciers and Venice's survival, from demographic decline as birth rates drop, from political instability and economic inequality, from the pressures of mass tourism that sometimes overwhelms historic centers and archaeological sites, from the need to balance preservation of cultural heritage with accommodation of modern life. Yet Italy also continues innovating, designing, creating, and maintaining its position as one of the world's most culturally significant nations, despite its relatively small size and population. The 2026 Winter Olympics in Milano Cortina will showcase Italy's ability to organize major international events, will bring athletes and visitors from around the world to experience Italian hospitality, landscapes, and culture will demonstrate Italy's continued relevance and capacity despite challenges. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Italy's strangest and most fascinating aspects. If you enjoyed this exploration and learned something new along the way, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Restful Realities for more deep dives into the hidden corners of geography, the unusual aspects of different countries, and the stories that make places unique. Your support helps us continue creating these relaxing, informative journeys into the world's most interesting places. Until next time, rest well, dream peacefully, and may your travels, whether physical or mental, be filled with discovery. Good night.